Hello and welcome to Queering IFS, a podcast by two internal family systems therapists, Alessio and Jude. I'm Alessio Rizzo. I'm an IFS therapist, a clinical consultant for IFS, I'm a trainer and a blogger. And with me we have Jude. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alessio. Hello, I'm Jude. I'm a Level 3 certified IFS therapist and approved clinical consultant and occasional trainer. And in this podcast, we explore themes and issues connected with gender, sexuality, and neurodiversity through queer and queering lenses.
Hello. Hi, Jude, and hi, Phil.
Hi, Alessio. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Alessio. Hey, Jude.
I'm so excited to have you, Phil, here with us and also to reconnect with you, Jude. It's the first episode in a while, isn't it?
It's been a while, yeah. Definitely a few months and definitely the first one of 2026 as we're kicking off.
True. And so I'm going to kind of say a bit of the title that's got me so excited about today, and then we'll introduce all of us, because I think, Jude, they need to hear about who we are again. We haven't told them for a long time. So, again, I'm super excited to have you here, Phil, for what's going to be an episode on bringing compassion to the complexity around pronouns for everybody. We're doing this for all systems. So, shall we start with the two of us, Jude, or shall we ask?
Sure, let's do that. That's what we do. So, yeah. We might be a little rusty. It's been a little while, but yeah, I'm also really happy to be back here. And yeah, back with such an important and exciting topic. Yeah. So, Alessio, would you like to introduce yourself first?
I'll go first. So yeah, I made a note about how I want to introduce myself today. So I think it's relevant that I introduce myself first and foremost as a queer person who uses pronouns he, they, particularly for today. And we'll hear more about the journeys that we go inside when it comes to pronouns. Professionally, I'm an IFS therapist on the trainer track. I'm a trainer and assistant trainer at the minute. And I am, involved also in bringing IFS to Italy, which is arriving in a few months. So that's me. And I'm obviously the co-presenter and producer of this beautiful podcast with Jude.
Thanks, Alessio. And I'm Jude, and I use she, they pronouns. I define myself, it's always changing a bit, but gender expansive, gender queer, I think feels right at the moment. I am an IFS therapist and supervisor and budding ecotherapist and circle facilitator, and I'm neurodivergent. ADHD is the most suitable collection of letters for my particular flavour of that. And yeah, really passionate about topics like this and queering. I love queering things. We're queering IFS, queering as a questioning, queering as a process of inquiry. So yeah, that's me.
Beautiful.
Phil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so there are always parts you can never decide how much to say, and then there's always that feeling that I've forgotten something afterwards, but just seeing what feels right today. So I'll go with the kind of the more of the social identity bits of introduction first, and then the professional. So I'm white, British, I identify as queer, and I am transgender, transmasculine, I could use several sentences to describe my gender identity, but transmasculine. And right away, I'm getting into the complexity of pronouns, because my pronouns that I have on the screen today are he, him. And overall, he, him is what feels right for my system as a whole. But I also quite like they, them pronouns, but that's turns out to be quite context dependent. I've been experimenting with that recently. And in queer spaces, I am equally happy with they, them pronouns. But in majority cis spaces, then he, him feels better for my system. So that's an ongoing exploration, actually, which we may say more about later. I also have ADHD, so there's neurodivergence here. And I guess what I really sit with is a lot of the kind of intersectionality around where I have privilege and where I don't have privilege. That's just something I'm really present with. Like I have a lot of kind of like middle class, educated privilege and a long kind of heteronormative history, which gives me privilege in some ways too. And then the experience of transitioning relatively late in life and then suddenly existing in the world in a very different way. So that, yeah. So that's a bit about me as a person, and then me as an IFS therapist. So I'm a certified IFS therapist and a regular and enthusiastic program assistant on IFS trainings. And I'm kind of just starting to move into being an IFS consultant. And that's something that I'm open to, but it's still quite new for me. I did the IFS supervision and consultancy training just a few months ago, and that was really great and very inspiring. And alongside IFS, which is my main modality, I also have a particular interest in working with people who have stress-related illness and medically unexplained symptoms like chronic pain, chronic fatigue, where the physical, medical stuff has been ruled out, how parts impact the body and how stress impacts the nervous system. So that's another big area of interest for me. And I'm a SIRPA practitioner, SIRPA, which stands for Stress Illness Recovery Practitioners Association. And I did that training, before I did IFS. And I'm interested in how those things intersect. I did a lot of work on how parts impact the body. Mm-hmm. I think that's everything.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So thank you, Phil, for being with us on this episode. Or what you shared is already quite rich of, food for thought, including the idea of context for gender pronouns. And it's kind of making me realize in which contexts do I use certain pronouns, in which contexts do I not. And recently I chose to not use pronouns in a cultural context where they are not well received outside of the UK. So yeah, I think, I'm curious to kind of unpack together this idea of, the complexity of pronouns, both in context outside, but also in the inside context, that it's, how, combining the complexities together and navigating them can be, could be challenging, but could also be stimulating and shed light on intersectionality, privilege or lack of privilege. So yeah.
I think what came up for me, just as you described that, like the internal and the external, is for me there's that middle layer too. So there's like the internal system and our parts and however they might show up in terms of gender or no gender and what pronouns different parts might want. And then there's, self as the kind of interface between our system and the world, and like overall what pronouns we choose to put on a badge when pronouns are invited. Because
when there is space on a badge.
Yeah. And and then that context, that wider system, like what feels appropriate. And because sharing pronouns, especially if you're sharing non-binary pronouns, is a very clear statement about identity, right? Like that's the thing about non-binary pronouns. Anything other than he and him is immediately sending a message that different people will make different meanings or different interpretations about. So, yeah.
And that different parts of us will also have different interpretations and feelings about, and whether, not in just whether we choose to share those or not. And absolutely, it's context dependent for me, for my system. Yeah, when do I want to, and when don't I? But also, I definitely have parts with feelings about they them pronouns. I have, parts internalizing kind of external judgment, which is coming up as you were saying that, Phil. Yeah.
And just something that I want to name now, because it came in really strongly, is stuff around privilege and around choice, around pronoun disclosure. And there's something about, like, for me now, if someone sees me, I don't need to give my pronouns in order to be gendered correctly. On the phone, that can be an issue. I get misgendered on the phone sometimes, but if someone's seeing me, people will make an assumption and they will use pronouns that feel good for me. They'll say he, him. Whereas for me, 8 years ago, if I didn't tell people my pronouns or put them on a badge, then they would have used the wrong pronouns and that would have felt horrible for me. So there's something around that privilege and that choice. And again, like with non-binary pronouns, people almost never use those by default. So if the pronouns that feel right for your system are they, them, then you're always going to have to disclose that if you want people to use them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's just all these different layers around, privilege and choice and what that means for different parts.
And thank you for this, Phil. It's getting me to, my parts are remembering something from the past, which I'm going to hold on and share in a second, because I want to say something about what happens after the pronouns are shared, which, especially if you share a non-binary pronoun, I definitely have parts that don't know how they're going to be received and if people are going to have an idea of what that means, if they feel comfortable enough to come and ask me, which I have I always invite people to do. And also how sometimes they can be overwritten. So even if you disclose a pronoun, they can not use it, or they can, because maybe it's something that doesn't come kind of natural to them, and it has an impact when you've taken the courage to disclose and then you get misgendered. So it's quite a tender area for my parts already. I can feel that coming up. And also want to name the freedom of which is the more personal piece of the non-binary pronoun. And I remember when you named, being misgendered now, when it happens, I remember being, I don't know if misgendered is the right word, but when I was much younger, I would have people come and tell me, like, it must have been 4 or 5, they would tell me, are you a boy or are you a girl? And that was so confusing to me. And, I just was like, what? I didn't know whether they were curious, they were coming from curiosity, like children do, or whether they were coming from some sort of kind of, you're a weirdo here. Why can I not figure out where you are at, right? So it's already kind of getting me back to a lot of confusion that exists within my system when that question floats around me.
And this is, why, as you were saying, Phil, before we started the recording, it feels like everything we're saying, this is why the word complexity is in here in our title today, the complex and compassion for the complexity around pronouns for everyone. We all have, it is complex, and we all have, like you're saying, Alessio, and Phil, like we're all saying, histories and feelings and impacts and what it's like to be misgendered, what it's like to name a non-binary identity and then have that either reflected back correctly as a really affirming experience or not. I'm not capturing everything we just said in what I'm saying, but coming back to the complexity.
So complex. I mean, just this morning I was walking my dog and I was thinking, I'm having this conversation with Jude and Alessio later. Maybe I better just spend a moment just thinking about pronouns. What are the things that I notice as I, just think about this topic? And I was amazed at how much came up. I was absolutely amazed at where my parts took me on this kind of just 15-minute walk and sort of talking out loud to myself like I do, or my parts were having a conversation as I was walking along. And one of the things that came up for me that I'd never thought about it in this way before is that pronouns are a label that we get assigned with by other people. So other people assign pronouns to us just in the same way that they assign gender to us, like from when we're very, very young. And so there is something about like pronouns essentially are labels. And I noticed a part in me that's just like, I just hate pronouns. I wish I lived in a country where the language had completely genderless pronouns all the time. There's parts who hate that we have gendered pronouns at all, which makes sense. But there's something around that, like, I think even for people who identify as cisgender, even for people who are pretty solid in their gender identity, can still feel uncomfortable about being asked to put their pronouns on a badge, because it is something about like, sticking a label on yourself. It's this very obvious kind of like reminder or like putting you into a gender box. And even if it's a gender box that maybe does feel right for you, it can still feel quite jarring to be invited to label yourself in that way. And the other thing that came up for me, which I thought was fascinating, there's some kind of a legacy piece in there. Because a part said to me this really old-fashioned phrase, which is always a sign that there's some legacy or cultural thing. It's like, who's she, the cat's mother? Are you familiar with that phrase, Jude?
Yes.
I think, Alessio, you might not be. So it's this kind of idea that when I was little, I was brought up with this kind of, politeness, good manners, that it's rude to refer to somebody by their pronouns, that you should use their name. So it's this kind of like very British, who's she, the cat's mother? So instead of saying she, you should use their name. So something around that, it almost feels like rude or jarring to have somebody using pronouns. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I'd never made that connection before. So I just wanted to bring that here and see what came up for you around that.
Oh, wow. I haven't heard that in a long time. It was that thing, wasn't it? It was, it's rude. You should, manager, be referring to them by name or by title even, but not she did this and she did that. Yeah. And I think you were about to say something, Alessio, and I jumped in, so I'll be really quick. But what you're saying, Phil, absolutely. This sense, the invitation to share pronouns can be, quite confronting, can be quite jarring, and exactly that sense of like, what are you declaring about yourself? Yeah, absolutely. And I've definitely had that internal experience in my system and had conversations around people who prefer not to in a Zoom meeting or wherever else, when you can automatically have it, choose not to, because actually for their system it's either less safe or more exposing somehow to have this declaration of, this is my box and I'm in it. That's what I was going to say, but Alessio, I think I spoke when you were about to.
No, it's fine. My thoughts were forming, so thank you for taking.
Oh, you're welcome.
Some time there. I had this word in my mind, like gender policing, some sort of, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, some sort of vigilantes of, and the cultural and the immediacy with which, if you misgender someone, people correct you or they correct you. If I see someone who is cisgender male and I spoke to him as a she, there will be ripple effect if I do it publicly. They will want to correct me, and maybe people around me will probably want to correct me. So the misgendering is like, it's a thing. And of course, I don't have the same say in, about the cat's mother, but I get it. So thank you for explaining it to me, and for all the audience who might have never heard about it. And also, I'm thinking in terms of my legacy coming from Italy, and I find that part of me being envious that at least in English there is in the language there is the gender neutral gender. There is it. We don't have it. It's either male or female. Everything needs to have it, which in itself is already a restriction or a constriction. You've got to put yourself in one of these two boxes. And yeah, I don't know where else I was going, but that's coming up strongly from my inner dialogue.
So what it's like to live in a language where there is no neutral alternative.
Yeah.
And actually with Italian and other Romance languages where everything is gendered, the table is feminine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was talking to some Spanish friends. They have created some gender neutral pronouns, but if I Google what's happening in Italian, there is no common language that's been decided. So this is all of a sudden a political discussion about, when are people with the power to do something about it going to create a label? And that's, I think that's the link to, on the one hand, there is a label and parts might feel strange or might not like a label. And on the other hand, if there is no label and you don't exist, so it's the double edge of
things. I'm just really feeling that about the importance of language. Like if you don't have a word for something, then it's such an erasure of identity.
Yeah.
So at least we do have they, them, and it.
Exactly. And also, once the identity has been presented, where is the language? What's the language waiting for? Why isn't language being created to accommodate it?
That made me curious about how Italian IFS therapists handle the whole, one of the golden rules of IFS is that you don't assume the gender of a part. So if there's no word for it, will they then, how do you do that?
Well, I wish I had an answer.
The part.
Part of this is that Italy doesn't have an official training yet. It's happening for the first time in a few months from now. So I guess we are a bit behind in a way. I know you call it a golden rule, but there will be other things people are concerned about. I mean, in that sense, you just use the word part in Italian, which is feminine, and you refer to it as with the feminine pronoun.
It's the part.
Because it is the part. And that then can create, it has an impact. But at the minute, I'm sad to say we are not there yet at this level of, of detail. We are at the point of translating the manual. that doesn't exist yet in Italian. So even how do you feel towards, we need to understand how to best translate it. That's where we're at the minute. And I wanted to, and I have your permission, Phil, to share this from a little chat before, but I was very touched and also impressed by an open letter that you wrote. Was it a year ago? I don't know. We were doing something together.
Maybe a little less than a year ago, but yeah, last summer, I think.
If it was after the ruling, probably around last spring, maybe March or April.
Yeah. Okay. So a little less than a year ago, it was after the ruling here in the UK, and yeah, I just thought if you wanted to kind of say more, if you feel it's okay, Phil, to tell us more about that letter.
I have a partner who wished I'd done my homework and looked at it before we came on the call, but from what I recall,
yes,
it was a letter to, like, an open letter to IFS UK, and I sent it to the kind of people who run it, and to lead trainers and people who are kind of like involved in trainings, and it was a request that pronouns can be invited on IFS trainings as a matter of policy, but also, recognizing that it is a sensitive issue and it needs to be handled carefully. So always making it clear that it's a choice.
Yeah.
But, and the rationale behind that is because for all the things that we've said is that it can be confronting for people, whatever their gender identity, it can be confronting to be asked to, or invited to put your pronouns on a badge. Overall, my belief is that overall that helps to make a safer and more inclusive space for trans and non-binary people. Although I did some research with my trans and non-binary friends, and that comes with the kind of caveat that if it's purely done as tokenism, if it's purely done to make the organisation look good, and there's no intention to actually really understand the reasons for it and to support trans and non-binary people and generally be inclusive in other ways, then it's actually not that helpful. But if it's part of a bigger plan to, be inclusive and look at where you can support that, people who are marginalised in that way, then overall it does help to make it feels like a safer and more inclusive space. So the letter was really kind of requesting that and laying out the reasons that it's supportive, because I think a lot of cis people have never really had to think about that. If you're cis, you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth, people use the right pronouns for you automatically because you look aligned enough with the gender that you identify with, then it's a lot of cis people, it's never occurred to them. It didn't occur to me until I realised I was trans, and then suddenly realised it was this whole complicated mess of like, oh yeah, if I don't tell people my pronouns, first of all, I need to figure out what they are. And then if I don't tell people, then they're not going to use them, and they're probably not going to use the right ones for me for years, if ever. People just don't realise, because there is a huge amount of privilege that comes with being gendered correctly automatically, that unless you've had to identify, unless you've had to examine that, unless you have friends or family who've had that experience, then a lot of people aren't aware of why it matters. And then, of course, people will say, well, that's all very well, but, if you're trans and non-binary, then give your pronouns, but why should the rest of us have to do it? And I can kind of see that argument, but then that's where we get into like othering. If you're the only person who has to put your pronouns on a badge in order to not get misgendered constantly, then that feels very exposing. And some of my parts experience that as kind of quite humiliating, actually. Like, I'm the only person who has to do this, and that can then really exacerbate feelings of kind of dysphoria. So something about just normalizing that invitation, and also normalizing and increasing people's awareness that you can't know what someone's pronouns are just by looking at them. And to make that assumption is potentially really harmful. So yeah, it's all about that kind of normalizing and just making it part of the culture is my hope. So that's what that letter was about.
Thanks, Phil. And we're going to share a link to that in the show notes as well, aren't we? Yeah. And what you're saying that's so important here is around the organisational responsibility for this, because it's like, yeah, otherwise the onus is always on the individual. Like, oh, I have to share my pronouns so I'm not misgendered. But then everyone else around me may or may not have that, everyone else in this room might be cis, but I'm going to have to, it's the access fatigue, it's the effort of having to do it. And then, like you say, it's the othering and the whatever comes from that. And I was in a training space last year, not IFS, a different, it was something else, doesn't matter what. And it was over a few recurrent sessions. And the question never came up at the beginning. So then my experience came up in exactly in that way of someone made a very gendered assumption about me, and then I had to correct them. And it was a whole, it was a really big thing in my system, which could have been avoided had that been ingrained at the beginning. Share your pronouns if you're so inclined. And it was one of those moments of like, oh yeah, I'm not allowed to forget this, but it's my responsibility to carry it. That's how it felt for my system. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something coming up for me around that. If it is normalized, if it becomes part of the culture, what we're doing by doing that is we are then preventing harm. It's preventative,
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit managerial, or maybe, there are parts who say, well, if we do it this way, then that is going to prevent some harm. Because, and this is why I have parts, obviously, who feel so strongly about this, is because I know what it feels like to be misgendered. And it's so painful. It's so uncomfortable. And we want trainings to be a place where people feel safe enough that they can learn. And if you're feeling othered and going, all of this emotional labor around constantly correcting people and constantly having to explain your gender, then, you're not really going to be able to learn. You're not going to be able to actually have the same experience. So it's about equality of access to the learning that's available on a training by trying to create as safe a container as possible.
Exactly.
Well, I'm so glad, Phil, that you're going to share the link. I found that letter, really, really important to read when I read it, and I can hear it in, every time I hear you speak about this topic, I admire the depths of your insight and also the awareness of the impact on other people. And sometimes, we're talking about a minority issue, and sometimes, there can be various ways for a minority to find a way to be seen, to have a voice, to have a label, to be present, rather than being other than, that's the access fatigue, just to be there with that aspect of your identity isn't a neutral stance. Whereas people the majority have the privilege of just having to go around the world, whether it's a trip, whether it's going to a shop, of making a phone call or getting into training, where that problem doesn't even exist for them. So here, the importance of making it an invitation, I was quite, I was just really appreciating the wording you used in terms of it's an invitation and we want to make space for it. And appreciating that someone might not want to, but just in that invitation, we are breaking the silence of it, which I believe is a big aspect of privilege. I mean, most often than not, privilege is silent. People don't know that they have it because it's a non-problem for them. It's like,
you don't know it. It's the water that you swim in. It's like fish don't know what water is because they swim in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which then leads me to the importance of these discussions that we're having, and of also looking at the power distribution in in any setting, whether it's a shop, whether it's a public space, whether it's a training. There are, I think the leadership has more power than anybody else to facilitate and find ways that are respectful to all, to make that offering, like, which was missing in your example, Jude, right? And it's an important thing to consider, because if it's not done, then it goes into the privilege of, oh, this isn't the problem. It is for some, and it could be for some, and we don't know.
Yeah. You've just reminded me of another layer that was in the letter around one of the barriers, I think, to the whole normalizing and making the pronoun invitation part of the culture. One of the barriers to that is that sometimes participants, particularly usually cis participants, will sometimes react in a not, they will have parts who will react to being invited to give their pronouns, right? And so that is then, of course, a challenge for whoever is on the welcome desk, for whoever is making that invitation. And you, obviously, we hope not to be activating parts, especially on the first day when people arrive. And so I can understand that concern. But I think what I said in the letter is that while I do understand that, if we choose not to make that invitation for pronouns in order to prevent activation of the cis majority in the room, then what we're actually doing is we're prioritizing cis people in the space, and we're actually prioritizing kind of cis fragility, and like, okay, we must protect the cis people so that they're not going to be upset about being invited to give pronouns. But in doing that, you're completely ignoring the needs of trans and non-binary people for whom that pronoun invitation might actually really make a big difference on that first day.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if we're coming to our time as well. And that feels like a really powerful statement to end on, Phil. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Yeah, really welcome. Really appreciating having the space to talk about it with you both.
And I just want, what's in my head now is around privilege and what we're saying about what isn't named. And I just want to say something around the intersectionality here and recognizing that I think I'm just saying this for myself, recognizing as a white person, I have a white British person, I have a huge amount of privilege in many ways. And then as a genderqueer, gender expansive person, and a neurodivergent person, I experience minority stresses, but I don't think I named my privileges at the beginning. And I think part of this conversation is about that as well. It's about, we've all got these waters that we're swimming in. And so thank you, Phil, for naming that so beautifully as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I echo the thank you, Phil, for bringing this topic to life. It's got me inside and outside, so thank you so much for your presence here with us.
Thank you. And again, thanks for inviting me. It was really, really lovely to be here with you.
And where can people find out more about you, Phil?
So I have a website, all of this can go in the show notes, right?
Absolutely.
So I have a website, and there's quite a lot of stuff on there about the kind of stress, illness, mind-body connection for people who are interested in that, as well as IFS. And I also have Instagram, where I post quite a lot of regular content on there that's kind of an intersection of IFS stuff and sort of mind-body physical health stuff. And a Facebook page but all the same stuff goes on Instagram and the Facebook page, so you don't need to follow both. I think that's everything. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Alessio, where can people find out more about you?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that question.
Surprise. Maybe your website?
Maybe my website, yes. therapywithalessio.com. I do have an Instagram account that I never use, so don't follow me on Instagram for now. Maybe it will change in the future. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, my website is the main place. They can find a page where I put shortcuts to all these podcast episodes, but also other things I've been doing. I think I want to name that since we last published an episode, I have become a published author. I published a chapter on a book for LGBT therapists and clients on IFS for body image issues for the LGBT community.
We should definitely link to that in the show notes too.
Or maybe do another podcast episode on it.
Maybe both.
So yeah, but yeah, definitely my website is a good starting point. There's a lot in there. There's the blog, resources, free, paid one, our workshop on IFS and ADHD, me and Jude. So yeah, it will be in the show notes. Thank you. And what about you, Jude? After you put me on the spot, I'm going to do the same to you.
Well, I was expecting it, so let's
were you?
Yeah, so you can find out more about me on my website, which is anchoredinself.co.uk, and I'm reasonably active on Instagram as well, sharing things around IFS, neurodiversity, and the circle work that I do, so you can find me there as well.
Can I just say the name of my website? Because I just noticed that you two did that. Although
your time is up.
My name is difficult to spell, but my website is just my name. So it's www.phildelahaye.com. So,
and we'll be in the notes as well. So if anyone needs it, we've got it there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Included.
Yeah. Thank you so much to Phil. Thank you, Alessio. And thank you, everyone who's listening. And we'll be back soon.
Thank you. Thank you both.